Okay.
That's how we're going to start today.
I'm not sure. But anyways, all right. So welcome to Answers News for June the 8th. And we are super excited today because there's people here. So
Yeah,
round of
let's hear
applause.
it. All right.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. So we are officially reopened both the Ark and the museum today. And it's just so good to see people walk around and see people, hear the museum on and the Ark on, because all the sounds have been like turned off. So it's like really kind of weird.
Lights have been out too. It's,
all
it was
the
very
lights
dark.
are on.
Yeah, it was. Every time I could come here to do Answers News and the lights was off, I was like, I don't like this.
Yeah. It was a sad time.
So it's great. Yeah, the Ark's open, the museum's open. It's exciting to see crowds coming back, and we're still trying to work through everything. So, for the live audience here, we really appreciate you guys working with us. Because there's all these new regulations and things like that we have to work through, and we thank you guys for your patience on that.
Yep, and we've got lots of full programming too here, both at the museum and at the Ark. Almost every hour, something going on with animal presentations and workshops and just all kinds of speaking and all kinds of things. So that's really good.
I'm seeing people hop online too, so we're starting to get people all around the world. So
someone saying like, congrats on reopening. Yeah, we're very, very happy that we are open again. When I came here this morning, I could hear the music and the sound. I'm like, this is so good.
It's good to be back. I'm sure many of us are adjusting a little bit, but it's good to be back. I can smell the disinfectant in the air.
I can smell the cafe. I don't know about you, but
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
We really strive to keep it clean and keep it safe for everyone,
really
and we appreciate that.
Great team here doing that.
Yeah. Definitely. All right, so let's move on. So we always start with a fun article, okay, because amidst all the bad news, it's good to have some good news. Butcher in upstate New York installs 24-hour meat vending machine, says customer response is unbelievable, okay? So this was in the wake of trying to, people come up with interesting things when the situation arises, and so he wanted sort of a no-contact way to get people meat, so what better than a meat vending machine.
Right. And this really helps out, first responders, people who work at odd hours too, to be able to go in and get some fresh meat and that sort of thing too. So
and it makes easy, but it makes easy for people that's pregnant too, because you don't need to go and smell all that.
You really are thinking of food the whole time.
I am. I don't know. The morning sickness are gone, so now it's all about food. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry, everybody.
Who would have thought we were going to start off with such a meaty article?
Yeah. So we're living out Genesis 9:3, which basically, when God said to Noah, right, that he could eat everything now. It wasn't just certain things, not just the fruits and veggies. And so, but it's good to see that things like this.
So what do they call this? It's not an ATM. Is it an AMM?
Automated meat machine. Yeah.
Meat machine.
Yeah. So,
all right.
So kind of cool. Some fun stuff there. All right. Moving on. Astronomer puts odds on extraterrestrial life existing, universe teeming with life, the favored bet. Okay, so what I love about this article is the very first sentence. Despite no clear-cut evidence, we're almost sure that extraterrestrial life exists.
Okay, so how much evidence was that again?
0.
None.
Well, no clear-cut evidence. Okay, I guess that's how they're going to get around it.
So really what this whole article is basically a mere opinion. It is just, he has the opinion that life is out there, place your bet. But you got to be careful being a betting man like that.
Now, what is interesting is they're using some scientific ways, like mathematical ways, like statistical ways, to say something about their opinion. It's just a belief from something, but they're using a different language here to kind of trick us to understand as like, oh, what they're saying it's scientifically accurate, but not at all. Actually, the statistical thing that they're using is just a theory that has in the system the probability they express only a degree of a belief. It's not a degree of anything else, just a degree of a belief that such thing happened. So
and they figure like it's all evolutionary assumptions driving this, because the idea is that if life evolved on Earth, and Earth is only 4.5 billion years old, right, and the universe is 15 billion years old, well, there's been all that much more time, so life must have evolved elsewhere too. right? That's the whole thing driving this idea.
Right, and it's built on naturalism and geological evolution, millions of years, and cosmological evolution, that sort of thing. So it's just an evolutionary assumption built on top of another evolutionary assumption built on another. And when they look at life and they say, well, wow, this world is full of life, well, it just has to be somewhere. It just has to be. But that's just a belief system. You know, according to Isaiah 45:18, God formed the earth to be inhabited. We expect it here. That's one of those things. So.
And they say that the intelligent life, it's very weak, the chance of that happening here is in Earth. And then I'm just thinking about, like, so what does it say about the people behind the study? Because if they're saying that there's no intelligence, so why are they talking here?
Well, that's one of the things that says in here, and I'm quoting the article. It says, if we played Earth history again, the emergence of intelligence is actually somewhat unlikely. Now, I want you to think about what he just said right there. They're assuming that the universe, which is not really designed for life at all, it's not, the conditions just aren't there. They're saying, yes, good bet, go there. But if it played again here on Earth, we probably wouldn't even get intelligence, which is designed for life, you see? So you can see a huge inconsistency on that part.
And, it's funny because Dr. Minton, who's an anatomist that works here at the museum, he always, one of his phrases to use with evolution, like when he explains something very complex, and of course, evolution believes it came about by random chance over millions of years. He'll say, wow, what dumb luck. Wow, we really lucked out on that, didn't we?
Wow, the dumb luck, we got a nose.
Yeah, and that's exactly actually what they say in the article, which is kind of scary. They said the possibility that intelligence is extremely rare and Earth lucked out remains quite viable. Okay, so we just got lucky here on Earth that life evolved and intelligence evolved so that we can study this, basically. So it just, again, you just see the evolutionary assumptions, what drives a lot of times for people to go out and even explore outer space and understand these things, because they know it has to be out there, even though
it's just a worldview. That's their belief system. That's all it is.
Exactly.
Hey, I'm seeing people hop on from Texas to Indiana to Missouri. They're starting to hop on from all over.
We got South Dakota,
Alabama,
California.
Yep.
Wish I was here. So we wish you were here too. So. All right. Austrian bishops commission book calling same-sex relationships image of God's goodness. All right, so this is to try to not necessarily endorse homosexual marriage, but to endorse a blessing, basically, of a relationship between two homosexual individuals. And one of the things that they kept bringing up in the article, and that we kind of discussed beforehand, was they kept saying, well, that marriage displays the image of God. And we're like, well, that's not what the Bible says. I mean, the Bible says people are made in the image of God, but it never says marriage is made in the image of God. But what it does say is that marriage is a symbolic relationship, right, of the relationship between Christ
and the church.
Right?
But sometimes those articles, they use those things that sounds good, sounds beautiful, sounds biblical, but it's not. And that's why we need to be rooted in the Bible and His Word, so we can kind of see those little details that they're trying to kind of...
That's called fake truth. You guys know what fake news is and things like that? That's fake truth. You got to watch out for that sort of thing. So as I started reading through this, one of the things that it says in the article says, the book that's in question here, the book calls upon the church to change her teaching against homosexuality and to bless homosexual relationships. Now, I want you to think about what just happened right there, because Satan actually called upon Eve to change her view regarding the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That is the exact same argument that Satan used on Eve.
The same strategy, always.
Same strategy.
Yeah.
And you see it over and over again in this article. And one of the things, when we think about the relationship between Christ and the church, and marriage being an example of that, here's the thing. So it's because it's complementary, right? You have two different things. You have Christ and you have the church. So marriage then can only be between a man and a woman, right? Because they're complementary. If you have two men or two women, you would have two Christ or two church, right? And you can't. It doesn't work. It doesn't relay that symbolic relationship really.
God created marriage, so He's the one that can define marriage. Right. And that's how He defines a man and a woman. And it's interesting here because they also use it has to have fidelity, it has to have kindness and patience.
Where are they getting all that?
Reconciliation based on what?
I know. They're trying to snag those from the Bible, but then they want to deviate from what the Bible says about proper relationships.
Yeah.
They want the church to change. But why do they want the church? Here's why. They want to give up what God has to say to adhere to what man has to say. They're saying man's ideas should be what the church is following. That's secular humanism. Ultimately, that's what paganism is. They're saying, get rid of the Bible and jump over to paganism.
Yeah, and over you see this. It's not like these bishops have come up with some new biblical evidence or idea that same-sex relationships are okay. You see over and over again, well, it's really about our feelings, that this is an okay thing to do because this is what people generally believe now, so therefore we have to go along with that, right? That
doesn't help on Judgment Day. I just want you guys to know that.
Well, and what if everyone thought murder was okay?
Yeah.
I mean, what if everyone thought, stealing was okay?
Well, back in Nazi Germany, people were thinking it's okay to kill the Jews,
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, I mean, just because people hold to that, boy, you still have to judge it to the absolute standard of God and His Word. 2 Corinthians 11:3, just as Satan deceived Eve.
Right.
We have to be careful of that. So.
Exactly. Okay. The evolutionary puzzle of the mammalian ear. All right, so the ear, it's a very, very complex thing if you haven't studied it or haven't looked into it. So I actually wear a cochlear implant in one of my ears because I don't hear very well. And so to try to mimic, technologically speaking, what God has created is very challenging, okay? Very, very challenging. And so I have a great appreciation for that. And one of the things that's interesting in the article is they're saying, well, how is it that the mammalian ear developed? Because mammals live in lots of different places, right? They live in the water, they can live on land. How is it that this ear could have evolved considering how complex it is?
It is extremely complex. And I hope you guys hear what we're saying here. Oh, come on. I got to have a little fun.
He's the king of puns, okay? So he's got to get back on his role.
Normally when I sit in that chair, I get some inspiration.
They just come out when you sit in this chair, right?
So.
Oh, my goodness.
Psalm 94:9, speaking of God here, he who planted the ear, shall he not hear? God is the inventor of the ear. He's the one who created it, designed it. And, when we're made in the image of God, it doesn't necessarily mean that our physical bodies are, but I mean, we have those aspects in the nature. God can hear, He creates us in a fashion so we can hear. And He's that good that He can design this sort of thing. Of course He knows about the ear. And if you look at creatures all across the spectrum, there's certain lizards that can hear and things like, of course, snakes are deaf. I actually understood some of that. Psalm 58:4 actually talks about the cobra being deaf. I always thought that was kind of interesting, although they have certain features of the ear to help them sense vibrations. But, I mean, this is incredible when you think about the actual ear and you look at the precise design and how intricate it is all the way down at a minute level, and it works. It works in massive numbers of environments.
Yeah, and they can't really understand how that could have evolved because like part of our jaw, basically, okay? It's kind of part of our jaw. So how do other organisms evolve something that isn't part of their jaw, okay? Because it seems like it changed so much. And one of the things that they say in the article, which is really circular, okay, when you read it, basically they say it evolved to evolve. Huh? Okay, so they said it evolved this way.
So they said it evolved.
Yeah, so it could evolve even more. It evolved evolvability is what they're basically saying. So it's very circular, so to speak. So it evolves so it could evolve more.
It's
it doesn't make any
circle,
sense.
yeah.
Right. It's just
they talk a lot about evolution, evolve, like the whole thing. But then they mention about adaptation and natural selection, which is not evolution.
Right.
So we need to be very aware of, even when we read papers and talk about evolution, evolutionary ideas, that they're actually talking about adaptation, natural selection, some of those things, and that's not evolution at all. It's just something that even the Bible talks about, like Genesis 1 talks about, like adaptation, natural selection, things that can change in the kind. So we need to be aware of those terms that they use.
It's interesting. It says in here, they're not clear why this has happened. They don't know how this happened, but they're so insistent that it did happen because they see it.
That's the worldview playing right here.
That is.
Because they don't They don't want to see God.
That's the battle here. You know, God versus man, the two different worldviews. We're seeing that drawn out right here. They have to have a story, so what do? They try to come up with a story. It's
not about the evidence.
Right.
Well, and they say they show, okay, it says in their article, they show that mammals, as compared to birds, were indeed able to evolve a much wider morphological and functional diversity. Okay, wait a minute. They don't show anything, right? Because evolution, you cannot watch it happening, okay? You can't show it. What they're doing is they're seeing these things and they're imposing their evolutionary assumptions and ideas on it to come up with their story, right? It's not something that they're seeing, they're imposing those ideas on. We look at the same evidence, right? We're looking at the exact same evidence, but we look at it very differently because we have a very different worldview as to what has occurred in the past. So we need to watch for words like that because it's very different when you're talking about this type of science in relation, which we call historical science. That's stuff that has happened in the past.
Someone has hopped on here and they said, glad to see the museum open. Do you have a live audience with you? So they may have missed the very beginning. Yes, we do have a live audience.
We do.
So,
Yeah.
it's exciting being able to see everybody out here. So.
Yeah. There you go.
You can hear them again.
There's proof.
We're excited about that.
There are definitely people here. All right. New video shows Planned Parenthood officials admitting under oath to selling aborted baby parts. All right. So there was several years ago, the Center for Medical Progress released a series of videos in which they had went undercover basically to talk to people that were in various levels of Planned Parenthood to admit that they were selling these, sadly, parts of babies for money. And so they've now, this isn't them, these are depositions that they've somehow, I don't know exactly, but somehow gotten a hold of and been able to release them showing exactly that these people under oath or whatever are saying, yes, that's exactly what we've done.
Yeah, it's really gets me when I was reading this. You know, it's sad just to think of abortion anyway, let alone what they're doing with the baby parts afterwards. I want you to notice the picture. If you guys can see the picture very carefully, this Planned Parenthood director is wearing a cross. Do you see that? That breaks my heart when I see that sort of thing. There's a lot of people out there in the world that go out and say, hey, I want to tell people I'm a Christian. I want to wear the symbology of Christianity and that sort of thing. But then actions, friends, speak louder than words. I mean, when you go in and you're just murdering babies like this in such a horrific fashion, that should break the heart of anyone. It should make you take a look at something like that and say, is this really the case? Because you can tell a tree by its fruit.
Yep. And you know, too, it's all about money. That's what this shows, that Planned Parenthood, it's all about money. It's not about women's rights. It's not about reproductive health care. It's about money. We did a story the other week on how they actually Planned Parenthood applied for a loan that they were not they shouldn't have been able to get because they have more than 500 employees, but they accidentally somehow were given this money from the government, and now they're supposed to return it because they got it for help during the pandemic, in which they were open anyway, so I don't know why they need the money. But I think it just shows over and over again that that's what it's really about. And what's really cool coming up here, though, is that we are going to have a fearfully and wonderfully made exhibit, and Gabby gets to be part of it now.
Yeah, my baby's going to be part of it. We're going to do some, can I say that? What we're going to do?
Ultrasound.
Yeah, the ultrasound. Yeah,
the
ultrasound. And then, well, they were all talking about this, and like Avery, she was like, "Yay, I'm gonna get my Avery." She does
one of our other hosts.
Yeah,
one of our other hosts. Yeah.
Yay, I'm so excited. We're gonna have the ultrasound. We're gonna be in the exhibit. And then I got so jealous that I got to get pregnant. So now I'm gonna be.
So she's pregnant now, so she can do this.
I just want you to know I'm not pregnant. I'm not going to be part of that.
Yeah. So, but it's really neat because we want to show some of those ultrasounds from different time periods of pregnancy to really show people, help them to be able to see and visualize this is a baby in the womb, and an abortion is wrong. And so
it really is. And, you know, I know there's a lot of people out there, potentially even people who are watching that may have been had an abortion back in the past. I want you to realize, you know, the blood of Christ can cover you when you repent and ask for forgiveness from the Lord. So, You know, we
That's
want to encourage people to get back to the Lord.
And that's another very important part of the exhibit. That's
It
what we
is.
want people to know, right? That God's
Really
grace
is.
is sufficient. And so that's
Yeah,
the good news.
don't be
with that.
deceived. You know, a lot of people in churches can be deceived by Satan and demonic teachings and that sort of thing. If you go back and look at the book of 1 Timothy, chapters 4 and 5, you'll see examples where people were led astray by deceitful spirits, and you know, they'd already started to compromise with Satan's teachings. You know, when Paul was writing to Timothy and he was having to deal with that. 2 Corinthians 11:14 says that Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. So all things need to be tested against the absolute authority of the Word of God.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. All right, next article, which I picked. Left-handed DNA has a biological role within a dynamic genetic code. All right.
Okay, so Bodie, let's go.
Do we want to leave and just
Yeah.
let her talk about
Yeah.
Okay,
genetics? What's
they were
this?
like, we read the article and we don't know what it's talking about. And I'm like,
It's
well,
nice
that's
having a
okay,
geneticist.
because you're a paleontologist and an engineer, but I'm a geneticist, and so I read the article and had one of those, science
I'm
geek
telling you,
moments.
when I read left-handed DNA, I was like, oh, it's DNA that people they're left-handed then. And then I was like, I can't understand anything about it. I'm just not going to read this.
Oh, they got the
And then in, like,
zDNA and
15 seconds, she explained to us in a beautiful way. I was like, huh, is that what it's about? Okay,
Yeah.
that's good.
Okay, so
All
Dr.
right.
Purdom, can you tell us
So
about
let
this?
me explain
Yes.
this. All right, so most of us think of DNA as a twisted double helix, right? It's like a ladder that's turned a certain way. And that is a conformation of DNA called B-DNA. Okay, that's what we call B-DNA. But they've known for years that DNA can take on other shapes, okay? Not just a twisted double helix. Sometimes it twists kind of the other way and it kind of unfolds. And so it's called Z-DNA. And I'll show you a picture
And those
here.
are little segments, right?
Yeah, so it's still base paired, okay, but it just sort of, it gets all wonky, okay? It kind of goes the other way, and you have
That's
what's
what they
called
should call it, wonky
wonky
DNA.
DNA.
Well, not wonky DNA, because I don't know what wonky means.
She's from Brazil,
zDNA,
so
we'll
she
leave
Yeah,
doesn't,
I'm from Brazil, so please use some words.
out of shape, kind of different.
good.
Okay, that's
That's
what
good.
wonky
That's
means.
good.
So there's other shapes too that DNA can take on. There's aDNA, there's eye motifs, there's all these things that we're finding out, all this complexity that's there. So they did find that it has biological significance or importance. It's doing something.
It does have a function.
Yeah, it does
Yeah.
have a function. It's not just, oh, it formed the shape. And the areas of DNA that do this now they've called flip-ons, okay? So they flip the other way. And it's really quick. Sometimes they'll just do it for a short period of time and then flip back the other way. But what they found, one of the things that it's responsible for is it's an area of regulation, okay? They don't find this in genes. They only find this in areas near genes. And so they think it's controlling the genes. That produces the proteins that make us. And so it's involved in regulation. And one of the things it's especially involved in is regulating the amount of interferon that we produce. Now, interferon is typically produced when we have a viral infection, but it can also be produced under other conditions as well. But if you produce too much interferon, then you can have autoimmune disorders or other immune disorders. So it's
Where you
important.
attack yourself.
Right. You have to regulate the production of it. This shuts it off. It tamps it down. So they're finding that in people that have
That's kind of an important role, actually.
it
It
has a
is.
really important
Yeah.
role. So they're like, oh, so now they're trying to look at this in disease, right? And say, oh, this is the problem. This is why this person has it, because they can't actually tamp this down. They can't shut it off, so to speak. And that's creating the problem. They also found that zDNA occurs near what used to be called junk DNA areas, okay? My favorite thing, because people like to say that a lot of DNA is just junk, okay? It's not. All right, we know it's not. And the more papers that come out, we find this. So these zDNA regions are near what we call ALU regions, ALU regions in the DNA that were thought to be junk for a long period of time. Now they're like, they actually have a role,
Hey, it's
okay?
interesting.
They're actually doing something.
There's a comment here that says, it sounds like this could be related to cancer. And that's one of the things it says in here in the
It does.
paper, is
Yep.
that this could play a role in cancer.
Yeah, it just shows us though how dynamic DNA is, right? It's not just like sitting there in our, nucleus of our cells just chilling out. It's constantly being. You got to think of that. There's 6 feet of DNA coiled up inside the nucleus of every one of your cells. 6 feet. right? So, but it's dynamic. It's constantly winding and unwinding and twisting and doing all these different things, all to regulate it. Tell me how that could have evolved over eons of time. Explain that to me. It can't, right? It's so complex because it's not just about the sequence, it's about the shape, the actual shape of the DNA.
Do you see how excited a geneticist gets at articles like this?
Sorry. But it's true, right? It just shows more that the more we know, that we feel like the less we know. The more there is to know because there's so much more to this.
Well, and there's a great point in that because, you know, when it comes to stuff like junk DNA, people are like, oh, it's evolutionary leftovers. I mean, we saw that with the appendix, and somebody pointed that out on here. You know, people used to think, well, the appendix was useless. Now they find out, wow, it actually serves a really good function. So the more people start to study God's creation, the more you start to realize, whoa, it opens your eyes to things.
Yeah, definitely. So now you understand it, right?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Yeah, that's amazing.
She doesn't know what wonky DNA is.
Yeah, I also learned a new word.
She learned a new word today.
Yeah,
so that's
wonky.
Good.
Okay, so let's go to the best one.
Okay, we're going to the next one because you like this one. I picked this one out for you.
Yeah.
Titanosaur footprints discovered on the roof of a French cave.
Okay, what is a titanosaur? Just to get so people know.
It's a sauropod. It's a dinosaur.
It's a gigantic one, though, isn't it?
It's a huge one.
Yeah.
And it's, let's say here, just like 121 feet long. In meters, it's 37 meters. And 138,000 pounds, like 62 tons. Just for you to have an idea, like the feet, like the track of them, it was 4 feet long, like 1.2 meters.
Like
so it's huge. Get something like that stepping on.
That's how big the fish are that I catch.
Yeah. So it's just interesting because here they found the footprints of those dinosaurs in this French cave, and it's just so.
It was neat too because they weren't like on the ground where you're walking; they were above.
Right, you can
them.
see it in the picture.
Yeah, you can kind of see it there up above. You have to look up to see them.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is
so it's just
fascinating.
interesting to see like a huge animal like that doing things like this, and also like how deep it was.
Yeah.
You know, when they guessed like 138,000 pounds stepping on something.
Right. And that's how the scientists determine how heavy they think this creature is.
Yeah,
how far it's
because
gonna step
the death of.
So how do footprints get, fossilized like this? Because when I think about a footprint, right, you think about walking on a sandy beach or something. It disappears pretty quickly. So how can footprints
It has to have water. It has to be muddy, so it could stay there like that.
Yeah, and it has to get buried quickly.
Yes,
I think
and
that's
buried quickly.
catastrophically.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's walking in the mud, boom, a layer comes in, fills it in, and you get the subsequent layers, and that solidifies then into the rock.
Yeah. Another point that I thought it was interesting too, because they are dating this in around the 160.
166 to 168 million
years ago.
in their
The thing
circular
is,
view.
if the footprint is right there for so many millions of years, like this material should have been washed away.
Wow, the dumb luck that that's still there.
Again, and destroyed, even like with the movements of the Earth. So it had to be destroyed. Why it's not destroyed?
Whole continent supposedly shifted, and yet that didn't get torn up.
So why is not destroyed? Why was not
See, that's
washed
a problem.
away?
That's a problem in the secular viewpoint.
Yeah,
it really
because
is.
it was not millions of years. It was something.
Right.
See, when I see footprints, I'm thinking in terms of the flood of Noah's day. This is Jurassic, Middle Jurassic rock. And so that was during the flood when this was being laid down. Massive catastrophe, water, mud, all that gets put together. You lay down these massive rock layers, which is what we expect during the flood. But I look at that and I think, okay, these are actual footprints. You see them in order. The 150th day of the flood, that's when all land-dwelling, air-breathing creatures had died. So you can't have footprints after that point during the flood. It had to be before the 150th day. So I see those rock layers and I think, wow, this rock layer had to be laid down before the 150th day. Now, when was the cave carved out? It could have been, late stages of the flood. It could have been post-flood.
Yeah.
Apparently, this still gets flooded, at least according to the article. So.
Yeah, but even in the article, it says over time, the site was buried by geological processes. you
Yeah.
would not
Yeah,
have
short
that.
amount of time, but
Yeah, short amount of time, but not a long period
and see
of time.
that's one of those differences between the secular view. The secular view has no major global flood, no major catastrophe, where we have a massive global flood that happened about 4,350 years ago. So we're looking at the same rock layers. The difference is the interpretation of those rock layers. And so we all look at the same evidence. The difference, of course, again, is that interpretation.
Yep. Okay, last article. Maybe. There we go.
Look at that.
The evolution debate is about honesty. Okay, so.
That's very Christian of them.
Which is a very
Aw.
interesting, title. Now, this article was just recently republished, but it was originally published back in like 1999 or 2000. And I think it's interesting.
Like last millennium.
Yeah, like 20 years ago, right? So I think what's interesting about it is it's still, like, they think it's valid enough to still publish it 20 years later, right? Because nothing's changed. Nothing. Not in this debate.
Now, here's what's interesting. As I go through this article, the things that they try to bring up, those are things that have been refuted over and over and over again. And so they're just stating it again. This is a common tactic we actually see from the secular side, just repeat it anyway. If you say it enough times, maybe people will believe it. But I look at this, and I see honesty, meaning, knowledge, wanting us to be trustworthy, rights, principles. You know, in a secular worldview, which is a materialistic worldview, none of those things have mass. They're not actually, they shouldn't exist in that worldview. What happens is they have to jump off of their worldview, come over and borrow from a Christian worldview just to make sense of concepts like honesty and knowledge and trustworthiness and so forth.
Yeah, I was watching a video on, and an atheist was talking about some things, and he was like, well, but this person is lying, this is not logic, there's a lot of inconsistencies. And I was like, where did that come from? Without God, what is lie? You know, what's the problem with
There's
lying?
nothing wrong with lying unless the Bible's true and God's right.
If we're all animal, there's no morality.
Right.
So what's the problem? What's the point with that? So yeah, and this is interesting because they love using morality, values, and principles words, but actually they don't make sense at all. They don't have a worldview that can support that kind of idea. And as I said, like without God, what that all mean?
Yeah, and basically what the person that wrote this was an editor of the Charleston and West Virginia, meaning Charleston Gazette. And so he was talking about the whole creation evolution debate, and he really framed it as like religion versus science, which over and over again we say this is not about science versus the Bible. This is about faith in God versus faith in man. That's what this really, it's an issue of two religions, if you want to say it that way, or two worldviews, right? And what we accept as the authority for knowing about the past. Is it God or is it man? So that's really, even though he says otherwise, that's really what the debate is about.
And when he's talking about religions, he goes out and says, well, you know, such claims must not be imposed on captive children in government-owned schools, except for his. He's more than happy for his religion to be imposed on the kids.
Right.
Naturalism, atheism, evolutionism, and that sort of thing. So he's got a double standard in there.
Right.
Yeah, and right here you can see, like when you're reading through it, you can see a lot of worldview taking place when he's like, well, those are not, those are supernatural beliefs, they're mystical claims, they're a fundamentalist.
And this is coming from someone who says everything came from nothing in a big bang.
Yeah.
And all life just happened to violate the law of biogenesis and somehow it suddenly exist from chemicals. I mean,
yeah.
That's
well, and
always
he
got
uses
that double
examples
standard.
that have, I mean, he says, well, look, this is a great example of evolution, drug-resistant bacteria. They're still bacteria, okay? That's not an example of evolution. That's just adaptation.
And actually, there is one of a presentation that you did in Oklahoma about bacteria. I love that. I want that presentation, by the way. And it's amazing. You explained really good what it's actually happening with those bacteria. They get weaker and they're losing information.
Right.
They're not evolving. They're not getting better or anything like that. They're just losing information. Another point that I would like to that it's important for us to be aware, it's about fallacies. Like here this says, science goes, science it's honest. Science is not a person. Science is,
exactly.
you know, science is not a person. It doesn't do any of that. If science is going somewhere, it just like run away because, you know, it's kind of weird. But that's the fallacy of reification. And we need to be aware of those fallacies because they use some of those language terms to kind of deceive us.
Right. Right.
they continuously set up straw men in here in one particular paragraph. The fossil record shows it, geological strata show it, radiometric dating show it. They just keep saying all that
They don't
stuff, even though
show
it's been
anything.
refuted. Yeah, I mean, those things are actually pretty easy to refute, but
Right.
they want to set it up that way. One of their prime examples was corn changing into corn was evolution.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
but I mean, we could go through this one for ages, but we're pretty much out of time. But I do want to tell you a little bit more about a book, Always Ready by Dr. Greg Bahnsen. He died a few years ago, actually last millennium, now if I think about it. But Dr. Bahnsen does a great job in this, really helping you understand fallacious arguments and dealing with these battles of apologetics at a worldview level. This is probably one of the more powerful books to understand and, and deal
amazing
with
book.
defending the Christian faith. So.
All right, so we're out of time for today, and we'll see you back on Wednesday at 2 o'clock.
All right, God bless you all.
We want to thank you for coming to our presentation.